We talk a lot about self-tapes these days. There are practically no audition processes that start in person anymore, and some of them start and end remotely. In the last couple of years, I literally booked 3 significant roles without ever getting into the casting room in person. It seems like something is beginning to shift, and that casting directors and productions are a little bit more keen to at least hold callbacks in person right now. But you still need to nail your self-tapes if you even want to get a chance to get into the room. I think we know a great deal about self-tapes nowadays, so I will recap here for you the indispensable technical aspects you have to get right. There are obviously plenty of great videos about this out there, but I want this to be a sort of a one-stop shop kind of video, so let's recap things together before we get into the juicy part that is a little less talked about. You don't need to go fully professional with your self-tape equipment, of course, but it's crucial that casting directors can hear and see you well. So well-lit face, clear audio, and no background noises. As a basic setup, you absolutely need the following: a tripod for your camera or your phone to allow you to record a stable, high-quality image, a light, could it be a ring light or a small studio light? This is essential in lower light situations or as a filler to balance out a stronger light source, like a big window, for instance. A backdrop or neutral wall. I personally find that the best setup for me is a source of natural light, like in this case I have a big window on my left and a light on the other side that acts as a filler and doesn't leave the side in total darkness. I much prefer this setup rather than a simple strong light in front of me, because I find that that really tends to flatten the image, whereas this still gives a much better 3D look, so to speak. You then need a background that isn't distracting. Here I've got a fairly neutral background in terms of colors, but I've got a visible door and then this black thing. This is not necessarily the setup I'd use for a self-tape, although I personally don't mind the pattern of the door, for instance. I do have a bit of an issue with flat white walls, as it makes the image very cold and sterile, in my opinion. But as long as your background is neutral, non-distracting, I think that you can choose a color that is right for your skin tone. If, for instance, I tape on a pale colored wall, like a pale yellow, for example, I look like a ghost. I literally merge into the background, which is not ideal. A lot of people use grays and blues, which seems to be a good standard overall. Some further technical aspects: don't wear striped or checked clothing that is going to make the camera go crazy, and avoid distracting patterns overall. Your eye line should be close to the camera, but not in the camera, so look where your partner is so that we can still see your eyes clearly. Make sure that you're clearly audible and that there are no distracting noises happening around you. Have a reader if possible. This is important for many reasons, but mostly for believability of your performance. I know that sometimes turnarounds are incredibly tight, so you have to do what you have to do, but try as much as possible to use a real reader and not a recording to act the scene with you. If you do have a reader though, make sure that they aren't too loud, at least not louder than you, as you should be the center of the attention here. Bring your best acting game and contain the amount of takes. You can be a professional video maker, but if your acting is not excellent, it will be worth nothing. In other words, your acting is still more important than the color of your background, believe it or not. Prepare for a self-tape like you would for an in-person audition. I personally like to think that I already have the job when I prepare, and I prepare for an audition as if I was actually going on set. This also allows me to tape only a limited amount of times. You want to make sure that your preparation is complete before you turn on the camera. What happens in the context of self-tape should be no different than what happens in an in-person audition. Of course, you have the luxury of taping some more options, which is great, but there is no amount of retaping that will actually make up for lack of preparation. And taping an infinite amount of takes will also make the choosing and editing process really painful and demotivating. So behave like a professional. Prepare solidly, tape with focus, and give your best, edit and send. Number 2, can I get creative? Do you always need to stick to a plain background? I'd say 90% of times yes, but there's a 10% of times where you can afford to get creative and it can really pay off. If you get creative though, you need to be able to pull it off. If you make unusual choices in your setup and then your acting is not up to par, you're going to make a fool of yourself. It's the same thing as recording super professionally, but having zero acting to showcase. I personally often play with clothing and setting. I have fun with it, it makes the process a lot nicer for me, and I think that sometimes it can really add something for the casting director too. Obviously, all casting directors are different and some will be more inclined to this type of thing than others, and that's fine. I never exaggerate though. Where possible, I try to take the casting director into a different world, the one that I imagine the character belongs to, but I do it in quite a minimalistic way. Maybe I choose a piece of clothing that suggests the profession of the character. Maybe I alter the setup ever so slightly to convey a specific mood. I'll show you some practical examples of this, and these are all jobs that I either got or that got me a call back. So the tape was indeed appreciated by the casting director. This is my audition for a day player in The Diplomat. She's a TV reporter. I got this part, and as you can see, I used the setup creatively here. I used this little camera, which is not recording, to convey the atmosphere of a real life situation for a TV reporter. This is another part that I got, is a regular in a Latvian TV series, and in this case I use costume to enhance the point of view of the character, which is cold and manipulative. In this self-tape I used costume and a little bit of makeup to portray a prostitute in a period piece. This is another self-tape that got me a call back, and here I used costume and a prop to help convey the idea of the character's profession, in this case, a race coordinator. If I decide to get a little creative though, I make sure that my acting, and I always do, but even more in these cases, is absolutely on point. If you're still a little unsure about your performance, or if you weren't given enough time to prepare properly, do stick with a typical neutral background and don't make your life even more difficult by making creative choices. Last super important piece of advice. Do your absolute best, send, forget. Yes, forget now. The ability to forget and to move on with your life is one of the most important skills for an actor. It keeps you focused, positive, and it really preserves your mental health. So forget, and hopefully you'll hear back soon.